launching event will be live streaming on YouTube at our GATJ channel. So if anyone wants to be with us in this launching event, please, you can also suggest the YouTube channel to see our event and to express your solidarity with us. So thank you so much. And I can see people are still joining. And it's nice seeing, it's really nice seeing so many people are joining in the event. Okay, thank you so much, Liz. So we are live streaming now. And again, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Ome Nahida, and I work with ActionAid, and I will be moderating this session today. So first of all, I would like to give an instruction for those of you who might be looking for the interpretation. Please, there is a button in the left side of your screen. So it's in the right side of mine. So at the bottom of the right side of the screen, so there will be French and Spanish interpretation available. So please, if you need that, please use that button at the bottom. So and again, welcome everyone. So to kick off the our event, I would like to start by sharing a bit about the guide. So Framing Feminist Taxation Volume 2 is actually written for individuals, civil society organization, and practitioners working in tax justice and gender equality. It builds on Volume 1 and provides a checklist of key issues and tools on gender equal tax and budgeting system. It presents tools to assess the gender bias in the current tax system and how to advocate for a feminist tax framework, a tax system that upholds human rights and enables substantive gender equality. Volume 2, together with Volume 1, illustrates what a gender-responsive taxation framework looks like, provides analytical tools, and discuss the case study of Uganda. So for this session, our discussion will be around the feminist taxation guide. Overall, our speakers will be presenting the guide, and also help us to think through and to understand what it covers and how to use it. And also it will create a space to discuss about how we can, how this guide can analyze the feminist perspective of these international financial architecture and also the COVID-triggered crises. So without further ado, I would like to give a brief introduction of our speakers. So first of all, we have with us Roos Saalbrink. So Roos is the policy advisor on economic justice and gender responsive public service ActionAid International. Prior to this role, she was the policy and advocacy manager on women's economic rights at Womankind Worldwide and coordinator GATJ Tax and Gender Working Group, looking at the structural causes of women economic inequality through a feminist analyst of the current global political economy. She is an advisory group member of Gender and Development Network in the UK. Previously, Roos was the World Bank Gender Project Lead and Communications Manager at the Bretton Woods Project, challenging the ways macroeconomic policies promoted by international financial institutions undermine gender equality in developing countries. She has also worked for women's organization in Honduras. Roos is a feminist and activist passionate about creating inclusive space to discuss women's rights. Welcome, Roos. And next we have with us Caroline Othim. Caroline is the Global Policy and Campaign Coordinator, the Thematic Policy Lead on Tax and Gender at the Global Alliance for Tax Justice, GATJ. She is passionate about the tax and fiscal justice, women's human rights, and gender inclusion with a wealth of experience in development work in civil society. She is committed to promoting gender justice fiscal justice, empowering marginalized citizens, and harnessing the power of campaign to make governments more effective and accountable. She employs creative and cutting-edge solutions to the challenge of fair taxation and enabling governments and multilateral institutions to listen and respond at the national, regional, and global levels through strategic partnership and coordination. Welcome, Caroline. And next we have Dr. Maria Ron Balcera. Dr. Maria Ron Balcera finished her PhD in education from Bielefeld University, Germany in 2014 with a Marie Curie Fellowship. She also holds a Master's in Human Rights from the London School of Economics and LLM in Human Rights from University of Carlos in Madrid. She has done research at the Institute of Education, UCL, as a visiting research associate, and at UC Berkeley through a research exchange program. Maria is currently working as the Tax and Education Alliance Coordinator, a transnational partnership that brings together ActionAid, Education International, Global Campaign for Education, Tax Justice Network, and the Global Alliance for Tax Justice. She has coordinated other multi-country projects in ActionAid, working in areas of education, financing, and privatization. Maria is also an associate lecturer at the University of London and she has experience as a consultant, researcher, and as a teacher. She has also written several publications, including articles in high-impact academic journals. So welcome, Dr. Maria. And last but not the least, we have Faith Lumonya. Lumonya Faith is a feminist and development economist with over 9 years experience working on trade, investment, tax, and climate justice issues at community, regional, and global level. She currently works with Akina Mama of Africa as the Economic Justice and Climate Action Program Lead. She previously worked as the Program Coordinator for the Trade and Investment Program at Southern and Eastern Africa Trade Information and Negotiation Institute, Simeoni in Uganda. Lumonya uses her writing, analysis, and advocacy skills to contribute to engagements at global, regional level broadly. Her work with the communities has harnessed her appreciation for the need for reflective and radical confrontation of patriarchy, neoliberalism, capitalism, and new colonialism that are responsible for poverty, discrimination, and oppression in society. Lumonya seeks to promote African women's and communities' engagement in influencing the change that they want. So welcome everyone, and without further ado, I would like to welcome Roos to discuss a bit about and give us a give us a brief about the current context and the key figures of the tax justice for gender equality. So Roos, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nahida. Hi everyone, Rose here. Really excited to be here today with you all and launching the second Framing Feminist Taxation Guide. There is so much work gone into this from the working group and Caroline and many others. So just to start with my compliments. And I will give a very brief introduction to issues that many of you are very familiar with before we talk in a bit more detail about the guide. And just to also reiterate that today is Public Services Day, so a very important day to commemorate and to think about all the things that we are fighting for that are connected for tax justice for women's rights. And the current context that we are in is very challenging, so feminist framing is even more important. We've seen stark regressions of women's human rights and an increase of violence against women and girls in the last couple of years of the pandemic. We're seeing this year rising food costs and hunger in the Horn of Africa due to rising prices and war in Ukraine, but also already existing issues in the global financial architecture that are rooted in colonial structure and neoliberalism that are really worsening the debt crisis. that are leading to increasing demands for austerity from the IMF and other financial institutions. The Global Austerity Report found that by this year, there will be 159 countries that are implementing some form of austerity, which includes cuts to public services, public service wages, and it covers 58% of the global of people around the world will be experiencing budget restrictions. So this is happening all around the world, and it's really compounding already existing gender inequalities and intersecting inequalities that we are addressing in this guide to look at. So they're even more urgent and important now to look at. And if we think about, for example, in Sierra Leone, the debt repayment is on 43%. And in many countries where debt is high, it's the largest budget repayment that governments are making. And tax justice plays a really important role in making sure that governments have the resources to pay for public services that have such an enormous gender equality potential. Amidst, of course, these tax policies are progressive and gender responsive, which is where these different guides come in. Just to frame it also the global context, the illicit financial flows are a really big problem, which are very difficult to address on a national level. So if we think about the first guide, we really looked at setting out some of this global financial architecture and assessing that from a feminist perspective. But in the second guide, we are also looking much more at assessing policies on a national level, and Carol will talk about that in a second. So if we think about illicit financial flows, countries in the African continent lose about 5.5% of their GDP annually, which is more than official development aid and foreign direct investment combined, making the African continent a net contributor to other regions in the world rather than a recipient. Whereas in reality, there are many investments needed in healthcare and education, just to mention two sectors. ActionAid research looking at public sector wage bill cuts found that IMS has advised for only 15 countries has led to reductions of $10 billion US, leading to a loss of 3 million frontline workers. And this is in the context of where globally, the World Health Organization has already said that there are 5.9 million nurses shortage globally, and 90% of those are in low and middle income countries. And just to reiterate that in the healthcare sector, 70% of workers are women, and of nurses, 90% of nurses are women. So the lack of investment here has significant impact both on the quality of work, pay, and but also on the burdens of unpaid care work, which we've seen increase across the board during the pandemic. Before the pandemic, it was estimated that women's unpaid care work is uncounted, but would be about 11 trillion US dollars a year, which is about 13% of global GDP, dependent on how global GDP is. Obviously, that has changed in the last years. But you can see it's a very large amount that is not counted. And this means that it's not taken into account by finance ministers and those setting tax policies and spending policies. So when cuts are made, women are picking up this work and are literally the shock absorbers of austerity policies and regressive tax. So just to end with that, we hope that the new guide that still reiterates the Tax and Gender Working Group's demands, which are to ensure that tax and fiscal policies are in line with the 5R framework, which is to recognize, reduce, redistribute, reclaim, and remunerate or reward care and domestic work. but also to reduce unfair tax burdens on women and adopt progressive, redistributive, and gender equal taxation. Remove gender biases and discriminations in tax policies to ensure that tax revenues are raised and spent in ways that promote gender equality. 4, ensure adequate financing of gender responsive social services that promote women's rights, reduce inequalities, and include, this can be done through gender budgeting. This is also very important for a feminist just transition where care plays a large role. And then lastly, establishing an inclusive intergovernmental UN global tax body to ensure equal taxing rights for nation states and to stop all forms of tax abuse by multinational corporations and wealthy elites. So I will end here and hand over back to Nahida and to other speakers that will share more details on the guide, which I hope that you will all look at. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Roos, and thank you so much for this brief but comprehensive summary of the framing feminist taxation guide. And now I would like to welcome Caroline to take us through the guide and share a bit about the tools and about the ways how we can explore the guide. So, floor is yours, Caroline.
Thank you so much, Nahida. I'm very excited today that we are launching the second volume of the Feminist Taxation Guide. It has been a long time coming. We've been working on this guide for the last, I think, 1 year or thereabouts. It was actually meant to have come out in March, but due to delays here and there, we are launching it today. So you can really feel why I'm excited about it. It's a collaborative effort of so many organizations, so many individuals coming together, bringing their expertise on the table to ensure that we have this guide. Building, of course, on the first volume that was launched last year at around this time as well. So really, to not waste so much time with the introductions, let me delve into the matter for today. But maybe introduce myself, Caroline Othim, with the Global Alliance for Tax Justice and co-chair of the Tax and Gender Working Group, as well as our Global Policy and Campaigns Coordinator. Thank you, Roos, for sharing your screen. That is very helpful. So who is the Global Alliance, or what is the Global Alliance for Tax Justice? So the Global Alliance for Tax Justice is a South-led organization that represents hundreds of organizations with our regional networks in Africa, Asia, Europe, North America, that's FACT Coalition and Canadians for Tax Fairness, and in South America as well. We also work through working groups, thematic working groups, and one is on tax and gender. And it's the working group on tax and gender that has taken forward the publication of this guide, including organizations such as ActionAid, Christian Aid, we have Tax Justice Network, we have Siatini Uganda, we have Oxfam also in the network, plus many other organizations that I cannot be able to mention one by one here today. So together, we've been able to collaboratively draft the guide, of course, with the expertise of a few individuals, expert reviewers also reviewing the guide. And so for today, I'd really want to focus on Volume 2 of the Framing Feminist Taxation Guide. And of course, as Rosa said, it's building on the Volume 1 that really focused more on the issues to do with power, to do with intersectionality, human rights principles, and the legal approach, as well as, you know, a political economy analysis of the context. So Volume 2 is now a step-by-step guide that is looking at what role tax and fiscal policy plays to fulfill women's rights. What tax and fiscal policy plays in domestic resource mobilization and expenditures, and really how we can be able to influence these policies to be gender transformative. It also highlights a number of tools, and I'm very excited that I'll be elaborating on 3 of those tools in the next slides. And really the purpose of this guide is to provide users with a tool for capacity building and to ensure that users of the guide understand the gendered nature of tax and fiscal policies, and to determine if their tax and fiscal policies are gender transformative or not. Maybe you can move to the next slide, Rose. To begin with, chapter 1 of this publication looks at tax justice and gender equality, giving a brief overview. We've not been able to, look at everything, but we've tried to touch on some of the critical elements that really form the components of tax justice and gender equality. And one of these really is how feminist analysis of economic models and tax systems is really very essential in the realization of women's human rights, because currently this is really not reflected and is not really being done as much. So it's important for us to bring this angle. This chapter also provides an overview of how taxes and tax policies tend to affect women, who, of course, at the end of the day, already face multiple intersecting inequalities. The chapter also looks at the issue of IFFs. Rose has mentioned how much, for instance, Africa loses per year vis-a-vis the GDP of African states and what that means. So this chapter looks at illicit financial flows and how really it undermines government's revenues and policies to provide gender responsive public services, and to also ensure that women benefit from these gender responsive public services. So this chapter looks at the care angle of taxes, care and tax justice, how that is important. It also looks at women in the informal economy, tax justice with a gender dimension of the extractive sector, as well as the climate crisis and its impact on women. So it's really a very brief chapter that provides an overview of all these issues, because these are very critical issues when we are looking at tax justice and gender equality. Next slide, Rose. So when you're looking at chapter 2 of the guide, it's focusing on 2 tax systems. And it also highlights a number of taxes. So it highlights and it really elaborates on progressive taxes and regressive taxes. So we also use the Uganda as a case study, and we look at the different kinds of taxes. So for instance, property taxes, corporate income tax, personal income tax, VAT, and other consumption taxes, and really illustrate which ones are progressive and which ones are not, because at the end of the day, it is quite clear, and it has been pointed out before, that, for instance, VAT is a regressive tax, and because of its regressive nature, it impacts women negatively, because women most of the time form the lower quartile of low-income earners, and as a consumption tax, they tend to spend more of their income on consumption, and so they are impacted negatively. We need a system that is more progressive, where people get to pay taxes on their ability to pay. So the rich pay on their ability to pay, and the poor also pay on their ability to pay, and everybody really pays their fair share of taxes. So we can go to the next slide. Chapter 3 now is really the center of this guide. Chapter 3 looks at 3 critical frameworks for gender equality and human rights that really analyze, tax systems. So chapter 3 presents gender equality and human rights analytical frameworks that the readers of the guide can be able to use and to analyze and to do a human rights and gender equality analysis of their tax and tax policies. So at the end of the day, when you look at the tools that are presented in chapter 3, we have number 1, the OPERA framework, The OPERA framework is a human rights framework that was developed by the Center for Economic and Social Rights. And it's a tool that looks at a four-step aspects of outcome. So from the perspectives of rights holders, what is the problem? Policy efforts, how government's actions affect the problem. Resources, in terms of how has the use of resources affected the problem? And lastly, an assessment in the broader context in terms of how the government is responsible for the problem. So it really incorporates these different measures for specific human rights principles and standards, and it frames them along these four principles that I've mentioned. So it triangulates the outcomes, the policies and resources to provide a much fuller picture of what state is doing to promote the realization of specific rights. And importantly, it traces the economic and social deprivations and disparities back to the actions or omissions of the state to make really the case that they constitute an injustice and therefore a violation of human rights. So it's a very important tool. It's a good tool to analyze the human rights aspect of the tax and economic systems. The number two framework is the Current Ground Conceptual Framework. And this framework, we can find it in the Taxation and Gender Equity book. This was edited by Current Ground and Imran Valodia, but this particular conceptual framework is put forward by Ground. And the Ground Analytical Framework enables you to also monitor the impacts of direct and indirect taxation on the different types of households using this methodology that Current Ground came up with, and it's based on sex composition as well as employment status. And so when you look at this conceptual framework, it is systematically used to examine gender and taxation within and across countries at different levels of development, and particularly the gender equity dimension of personal income taxes, value-added taxes, excise taxes, and fuel taxes. And some of the countries that this framework has been used to assess their tax systems include Argentina, Ghana, India, Mexico, Morocco, South Africa, Uganda, and the United Kingdom. So as you can see, these countries are at different levels of development, and this particular tool really is able to help the users understand the gender dimensions within the tax systems of the taxes that I've mentioned. And the guide, when you look at the guide, it simplifies this particular framework, and that is what is exciting about it. It simplifies this particular framework and applies it for the case of Uganda. So in this case, if you read the guide, you will see the analysis for how the tax system was structured 10 years ago in Uganda, and the extent to which their gender concerns were there then versus the current situation, and what reforms have been made within the tax system in Uganda to make it gender responsive, to make it gender transformative. So it's also a tool that you can be able to use in your context, in whichever country you are working in, to be able to determine to what extent the tax system within that country is gender transformative or not. Let me move to the next tool, Rose. If you can move to the next slide, thank you. The next tool and the third tool that we find in the guide is the Fair Tax Monitor. So the Fair Tax Monitor is also a collaborative effort led by Oxfam, Tax Justice Network Africa, and other organizations. So it's a unique evidence-based research and advocacy tool that really identifies the main bottlenecks within tax systems and is able to provide very strong evidence for advocacy work at the national level and at the international level. And so, using the example of Uganda, and Uganda recently launched its Fair Tax Monitor report. I think this was last month. So using the example of Uganda, there are gender-specific questions in the Fair Tax Monitor, and it's quite detailed, and it demonstrates the gender analysis of using this methodology within Uganda. And so it's been able to identify what are the gender issues in Uganda in relation to gender and taxation. So it's also a very good tool for us to be able to analyze our tax systems to determine to what extent it's gender responsive or not. Maybe we move to the next chapter, next slide, which talks about chapter number 4. So chapter number 4, therefore, elaborates the case of tax justice in Uganda. So looking at tax justice and gender equality. And in this case, Uganda has a very rich history of feminist economists and women's rights organizations and feminist groups, civil society organizations working on these issues. For instance, Akina Mama of Africa, who have been very instrumental in helping us to put together this guide. They are a feminist leadership center, and they really are guided by the Charter of Feminist Principles for African Feminists. We also have Siatini, and Siatini is a co-chair of the Tax and Gender Working Group. They also host the Tax Justice Alliance Uganda, and they're able to influence the budgeting process through budget analysis, tax policy analysis. They also have a very robust work program on trade. We also have FORWARD, which is a forum for women in democracy in Uganda. In Uganda, it's also a national level organization in Uganda doing very good work in terms of their budget, their village budget clubs, you know, and they're able to promote issues to do with social accountability. So these groups really, they have done a lot of work and a lot of mobilization over the past, and we can be able to build on the work that they have been doing. And they have focused on instances of revenue generation, as well as equality enabling measures on the expenditure side. And with their organizing for gender responsive budgeting, we can be able to use the evidence that they are putting out there. And that has been synthesized in the report to really take forward this conversation around framing feminist taxation. So when you look at this chapter, it demonstrates the multiple ways that women's lives are linked to taxes and public services, and therefore really the case of Uganda is one that is a very good highlight to, you know, look at this aspect. The other element that I would also want to point out in regards to this publication is that it has very good exercises at the end of particularly chapter 1 and chapter 2. And the guide recommends these exercises to be able to enable readers to develop their own analysis and advocacy strategies for their work on tax justice and gender equality, so that readers are able to understand tax policy and the tax systems in their own countries and the role of tax in macroeconomics more broadly. So these exercises really at the end of the day challenges readers to understand these different taxes and their implications for gender equality. And my colleague Maria will be able to talk more about this, as she's the one who will be coming up next to really talk about the different elements. And in conclusion, as Rose had said, the guide reiterates our demands on the 5 key areas, on the 5R framework for care and tax, on unfair tax burdens, on the need to reduce gender bias, on the need for gender responsive public services, and the need for an intergovernmental global tax body. So I would want to stop there, and thank you all very much. I really look forward to the interactive session after the next presenters have been able to share with us. So thank you, and I hand it back to Nahida.
Thank you so much, Caroline. Thank you so much for this excellent presentation and take us to the inside of the guide chapter by chapter. Thank you so much for that. So now, let me welcome Dr. Maria to take us through the exercises of the guide, how we can best use of this guide. So Dr. Maria, over to you. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to echo everyone. Huge congratulations to the leading team for this great collective effort. And it's a great honor to be presenting here some of the exercises that, as Caroline mentioned, are included in this second volume of the guide. Part of the reason why I've been involved in these exercises is to do that, as Nahida mentioned at the beginning, and the coordinator of the Tax and Education Alliance. And I have also been working in ActionAid previously, and obviously ActionAid is one of the partner organizations in the Tax Ed Alliance. And they produce a tax justice reflection toolkit. And this has been the combination of a number of work and experiences from many countries. And we thought that it could be a good idea to include some of this in the volume. So I'm going to talk in general about the exercises from for this volume 2, and because they are quite varied, and they offer exercises not only for the readers, but also for facilitating group discussions on the theme of taxes, gender equality, and tax justice. Most of them are participatory exercises with the aim of raising awareness, to develop capacity, share ideas, and also to build solidarity to take action, right? The way that they are presented they are meant to be adapted, right? Depending on the needs and the aims of the group. And they offer a variety of exercises that include questions for reflection and to ensure that we are understanding what has been presented so far, diagrams to be able to analyze our own experiences or the experiences in our country or our group, role play exercises, also power maps, action plans, etc. The aim of the exercises is to help us understand tax policy and the tax system, particularly for the participants in their own countries, and also the role of tax in macroeconomics. They also are meant to raise awareness and to enable critical analysis of the different taxes in their countries and their implications for gender inequality. And as I was saying before, with the aim to take actions, right, in terms of to identify advocacy strategies for tax justice and gender equality. So in terms of some examples, although obviously the volume offers a lot more, and as Carol was mentioning before, most of them refer to chapter 1 and 2, although there are some in other chapters. Some of them refer to the sessions for the workshops to enable participants to reflect critically. So the first exercise is about you and the workshop participants, where the facilitator would bring some of her experience with it, as well as experiences from the different participants. Then the tax and gender in your community, the discussions of the materials presented so far, particularly those drawn from chapter 1, and also the exercise on public services and gender equality. I'm not going to read the questions on the right, but these are some of the examples that you have. And as you can see, some of them are focused more on the individual group, or actually even on the individual itself, or some of them go to a broader level, right? More meta-analysis in that sense, including like discuss why a feminist approach is needed for understanding tax systems, right? And as I was saying before, they need to really be adapted to the different needs of the groups that we are dealing with. These are some of the participatory action exercises that we borrowed from, as I was saying before, from the Reflection Action Toolkit on Tax Justice that ActionAid developed. One of them is the body map, in which you are meant to, together with the group, you are meant to be drawing, so almost like, as a body, like normally a woman. And in that one, you are meant to be writing, like with Post-its or even writing on the floor, somehow the lack of public services, right? Or a particular tax, how it affects, right? How it affects you, how it affects your body, how it affects your health, also to think of all the experiences from other women or girls, etc. Right? And from there, then just being able to present. So just having this material, this visual exercise really helps you analyze in a way that can be more welcome for other participants as well, and in a way that everyone is enabled, right, to express what they feel in an easier way, in a sense. That normally is linked as well to the public services map, which is drawn in terms of like what kind of public services are in your community or your village, which ones are provided by the state, which ones are of good quality, which ones are actually private, how far away are they from your houses, right? What does it actually mean? So this is which ones are lacking. So this is just to analyze the state of the public services that could be education or health, or water, or any other thing, right? The sanitation and the impact on local people, and to analyze the priorities and prioritize the most needed public services in the participants' areas, and particularly looking at it from applying a gender analysis to it, right? Does it mean the same for women, for girls, for men, for boys, right? And this is another exercise that is provided as well in terms of the effect matrix. So why does the lack or the quality of this public service, how does it affect women and girls and men and boys? Is it the same? And then once you are writing it down, you can compare it. And sometimes you can actually split the groups in terms of the gender, or also in terms of their ages. And this provides a really good tool for discussion, and actually to take some action-oriented strategies. So I don't want to take much time, but just to say that in the tool, in the reflection action toolkit on tax justice from ActionAid, there are also some other exercises that I would encourage you to have a look at, and I will also share the link. And just to say thank you very much for inviting me to participate, and congratulations again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria, for your excellent presentation. And I was really so intrigued that I would love to exercise some of the, exercises to use it to understand how this is actually works. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. But now we'll be moving toward our last speaker. But before that, I would like to welcome everyone to use the Q&A option to share your questions, any feedbacks, or any opinion that you might have after hearing all of our speakers. So please put your questions and feedback in the Q&A tab so that we can request our speakers to share their feedback and answer your question as well. So thank you so much. So now I'm moving on towards our last but not the least speaker, Faith. So Faith Lumonya, I hope I'm not mispronouncing your name. So she will be take us through a tangible example, a tangible example of tax policies, that how tax policy can change and also link with the women's lives, and how it can have an impact on women's lives specifically. So over to you, Faith. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nahida. Yeah, so I am Faith Lumonya. The name is Lumonya, but it's okay. I mean, yeah, pronunciations differ from place to place, so it's always good to be tolerant. Yeah, so I was asked to basically share why we chose to focus again on Uganda as a case study. And you'll recall that, and I think this is something that Caroline has already also alluded to, as well as the different other speakers. Volume 1 also focused on Uganda. And from Caroline's presentation, you'll also realize that the 3 tools that she highlighted that are captured in the guide have also been used extensively in Uganda to analyze policy system, but to also shape proposals and positions for tax justice. So there's definitely a number of lessons that can be picked from the Ugandan context. And so I will invite us all to really look at the guide and also make use of it. So just to start off with the Fair Tax Monitor. So one of the things that is clear is that this particular tool helped to demonstrate the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and how it led to reduction in government revenues as well as grants. And the government instituted austerity measures during this period. And this was really out of the different policy proposals that were being put forward to different countries by international financial institutions like the IMF and World Bank. And so we saw that because of the austerity measures, there was a cut in spending on social sectors, particularly education, health, and social development, basically looking at agriculture, water, and sanitation. And so there was lower spending when it came to these particular sectors, and these budgets, the budget cuts directly affected women. And I think one of those clear examples is, for instance, in terms of the education sector with the different changes that were happening because of COVID-19 and the need for work from home, cuts to this particular sector affected access. But also at the same time, we noticed that there was an increase by 12% of tax on internet. And so even the study from home for a number of students became difficult, particularly for those that those within the rural areas where access to internet because of poverty is very challenging. But again, because examples like this then show you the discrepancy and the gap between tax policy making and development, that there are cuts that are happening to these sectors that are supposed to provide these public services, particularly, for instance, education, but again, that there are tax policies that are being implemented that are also then affecting consumption per se. So you realize that also in terms of the tax burden, it then increased, and Uganda generally significantly depends on indirect taxes, although from some of the statistics that have been highlighted in the previous years, we've seen that this is changing slightly. And so we could say that the country's tax system is becoming less regressive, but the country's excise duty regime, which has a degree of progressivity, has also presented a number of challenges as households within the top deciles pay more excise duty as a percentage of their consumption than those within the households of the bottom decile. So this has, because of that, because the excise duty regime is more progressive, it presents that those with higher incomes are paying more, and those with lower incomes are paying more. But within the context of, for instance, the example of mobile money, at the moment in Uganda, 0.5% of withdraw of 0.5% of excise duty is charged on withdrawal. And because of the structure of the financial sector, that a significant number of women particularly do not have access to what we would refer to as the formal banking system, they tend to rely more on mobile money. And so while the assumption in this case would be that those with higher incomes are paying more, the reality is that because the poor are the ones who consume more of some of these services, they actually tend to pay more. What this then means is that the burden of taxation is actually carried by low-income earners. And so you realize that the average Ugandan then faces increasing difficulty in being able to make a living and access basic goods. And when you think about, for instance, healthcare, the cost of healthcare in Uganda is high, and so the justification for increasing investment to this particular sector is very critical, because it would be able to lower the out-of-pocket expense, which is currently at 35%. When I think another example would be in terms of tax on personal income. Uganda's tax system of personal tax contains a number of implicit gender biases. About 10 years ago, when there were tax reforms, that's 2010, specifically, there were no adjustments that were made, adjustments of tax thresholds and brackets to compensate for inflation, which then resulted into implicit gender biases against women. One of the conceptual frameworks, that's the Grown's conceptual framework that is proposed within this guide, is premised on the need to facilitate the realization of the principles of the Convention for Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and on the characterization of households based on defined gender attributes. And it's clear from a lot of the research within the labor market that women continue to earn less than men, and so the justification for a tax system that recognizes this particular reality is critical, but also in terms of unpaid care work. Because the burden and responsibility of unpaid care and domestic work largely falls on women, a lot of their income is often spent in purchasing consumption goods, and indirect tax. A lot of the indirect taxes are actually charged on purchase of consumption goods. So we are talking about VAT and excise duty, and so adopting the feminist frame of analysis is also very critical to be able to address this particular issue. Maybe to just, in terms of my last thoughts, is that when you look at the Ugandan tax system, there is existence of horizontal gender inequity in the system, that households with the same level of income but a different composition of taxpayers have different personal income tax burdens. So and persons with the same level of income and composition of taxpayers pay the same amount of income tax, regardless of whether they contain children and other dependents. And so while there has been a number of strides made by groups in Uganda, for instance, in calling for fair tax systems, particularly challenging unfair tax incentives, and basically the unfair tax system, you realize that there's also a number of challenges that exist. And I hope that from the different examples I have shared, you've been able to see the relevancy of applying some of these frameworks, and that even in using the Feminist Taxation Framework Guide Volume 2, it will be able to support you within your different spaces to be able to advance feminist tax justice alternatives in your countries. Thank you very much. Over to you, Nahida.
Thank you so much, Faith. And thank you so much for sharing the case of Uganda. And I think many of us can link all the examples to our country context, and also at regional level and international level, because this inequality and injustice in tax systems and overall fiscal policies it's very widespread. And everyone can feel it much more than ever after the pandemic. So thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, so we are actually running a bit over the time, but I would like to request to our participants and audience to ask your questions or any feedback or any comments if you have. Please put it in the chat box or in the Q&A button, Q&A option, or if we want to come on in the mic, I think they can use the mic, right? I don't think you can use the mic. So yeah, perhaps I will go around again to ask our speakers for any last thoughts or any comments, any last words if they have to share with us regarding the guide. That will be helpful. I can see Caroline and Roos and everyone. So please, if you have any last words before we close the event. So who wants to go first? Maybe Roos? Roos, please.
Okay, sure. Thanks. Yeah, I'm just to say, please read the guide, share it with as many people as you can on all the channels that you have. And any feedback or thoughts or ideas that come to mind, always reach out to Caroline and Nahida and Grace and the co-chairs of the Tax and Gender Working Group. We really hope that it is a useful tool. And just again to say my congratulations to all the hard work and the team going into this guide, and yeah, we really hope that it's useful. So again, congratulations to everyone.
Super.
Thanks,
Thank you, Rose, so much. I would also want to echo your words, and also to add that we welcome all participants in this launch today to also join us in our ongoing campaign on Make Taxes Work for Women. This is just one of the resources that we are putting out there. There are so many other resources that would really go a long way towards complementing our campaign on Make Taxes Work for Women. And also to mention lastly that this, as you've seen, is volume 2. So be on the lookout for volume 3 in the near future, and hopefully volume 3, as we had envisioned, should be a guide that should look at economic feminist application using statistical simulation, so that we really look at the numbers and crunch the numbers, looking at the different taxes. So for the next volume, you will be looking at a simulation model to look at how your tax system is gender responsive or not. Thank you.
Thanks, Caroline. Next, Maria, I think. Any last word?
Just to echo what everyone has said, I encourage you to read it, to reflect on it, to do the exercises, to share it with as many people as possible, to try to translate it to people's different languages, because for some of them it might be a little bit more advanced, but we were trying to make it as accessible as possible. And then to say congratulations again, particularly to the leading team, because of the amount of work that has gone into it. And yeah, I look forward to this trilogy or possibly a saga of volumes. So yeah, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Maria. Over to you, Faith.
Yeah, thank you very much. And also to add my voice and say congratulations to the entire team, but also re-echo Carol and about the campaign around making taxes work for women. And I think just to say that every year there is the Global Days of Action for Tax Justice. And just to encourage each one of us to be part of this. I think civil society in Uganda have also benefited from this and have also been able to better connect with the global tax justice movement. And this has sprouted into a number of other benefits beyond just contributions to their work, beyond just the work around developing some of these pieces, but also in influencing macro level economic systems, structures, and institutions. Yeah, thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Faith. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining. So before we close the event, I would like to thank everyone. And also, I would like to say that this guide is also available in Spanish and French, and it will be uploaded in the GATJ website. So please do look at the website and read the guides and use it, and please circulate it and share it within your network. And thank you so much for joining us. And last but not the least, I would like to thank our interpreters for their support. And thank you so much for joining. Bye. Bye, everyone.